Hello everyone, today we will talk about the birth of alcohol in history and the development of alcoholism over the centuries. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Examining the history of alcohol means tracing one of the oldest and most enduring traditions in human history. Alcohol is not merely a beverage or a chemical substance, it is a phenomenon central to cultures, rituals, economic relations, religious symbols, and social transformations. From the earliest times, when human societies learned to cultivate crops, the accidental discovery of fermentation had a profound impact on lifestyles, even contributing, according to some historians, to the transition to a settled life. This demonstrates that alcohol functioned not only as a recreational substance but also as a social binder, a nutritional supplement, a medical tool, and a religious symbol. Archaeological evidence extends the history of alcohol production back at least 9,000 years. Traces of the fermentation of rice, honey, and wild grapes have been found in pottery found in the Jiahu region of China. This find is one of the earliest known evidence of the deliberate production of alcohol by human societies. The resulting beverage, while not as standardized as today's beers or wines, required a rather complex production process considering the technical level of the time. The combination of rice and honey produced a beverage that was both sweet and high in calories, while the chemical effects of fermentation gave it a slightly intoxicating effect. These beverages were used not only for nutritional purposes but also likely in rituals, celebrations, and events that strengthened social harmony. Archaeological evidence found in the Middle East indicates that Mesopotamia was the most important region in the history of alcohol. In the 4th millennium BC, the Sumerians practiced beer production as both a cultural and economic activity. Cuneiform scripts found on Sumerian tablets describe various types of beer, how it was consumed, and even the social status of the brewers. One of the most notable examples is the famous hymn to Ninkasi. This hymn, dedicated to Ninkasi, the patron goddess of beer, is essentially a text containing the recipes used in beer production. The hymn also describes how the fermentation process developed, the vessels in which beer was stored, and how it was shared within the community. This demonstrates that beer was not just an ordinary beverage in ancient Mesopotamian society, but also held significance as an economic and religious tool. Alcohol production was also widespread in ancient Egypt, and beer, in particular, became a staple beverage consumed by all segments of society. Egyptians used beer both as a form of wages for workers and offered it to the gods in religious rituals. Beer constituted a significant portion of the daily rations of the workers who built the Giza pyramids, as it was both easily transportable and safer than water. Because water resources were at high risk of contamination, making beverages safer through fermentation was also important for public health. Ancient Egypt was also advanced in wine production. Vineyards were found, especially in the northern regions of the Nile Delta, and wine was preferred primarily by the upper class. Wine was a symbol of status, and wine vessels found in pharaohs' tombs attest to its value even in the afterlife. By the time of Greek civilization, wine had evolved from being merely a beverage into a philosophical and social symbol. In ancient Greece, drinking gatherings called symposiums were central to the intellectual life of the period. At these gatherings, wine was consumed, poetry was recited, music was performed, and philosophers engaged in debates. Mixing wine with water was a deliberate choice to distinguish themselves from barbarian tribes. For the Greeks, drinking undiluted wine was considered contrary to reason and moderation. This detail highlights the fact that wine was not only a pleasurable beverage but also a cultural indicator. The cult of Dionysus had a religious structure that established a sacred bond with wine. This cult included rituals that explored the limits of both enthusiasm and order. Wine production became even more widespread during the Roman Empire, with nearly every region producing wine. Vineyards were established throughout much of Rome's vast territory, and wine became an important element of both trade and culture. As wine spread across the empire's borders, local production traditions merged with Roman culture, transforming wine into a cultural heritage that would endure for centuries in the Western world. By the Middle Ages, monasteries played a decisive role in alcohol production in Europe. Monks pioneered the production of beer and wine, organizing not only religious life but also agricultural and production activities. Some beer brands that are famous even today trace their roots to medieval monastic traditions. Monks developed fermentation techniques, producing more stable and reliable beverages. During this period, beer became a staple food source, especially in the northern regions, because grain was abundant and grapes were scarce in the north. Wine, however, was common in the southern regions, and as regional viticulture techniques developed, different wine types emerged. In the Middle Ages, alcohol was also used for medicinal purposes. Due to its antiseptic properties, it served to clean wounds and as a solvent for various herbal mixtures. The situation of alcohol in the Islamic world is more complex. Although alcohol is prohibited in the Quran, wine culture did not completely disappear in the Islamic world, especially in the early periods. Production continued in some regions. The existence of literary texts on wine among Abbasid-era poets indicates the existence of a drinking culture. However, in general, Islamic societies, especially in the middle and late periods, rejected alcohol for religious reasons, and beverages such as sherbet, coffee, and later tea became widespread. However, the development of distillation techniques in Islamic medicine led to the chemical purification of alcohol, thus creating both medical and scientific uses. The adoption of the word alcohol into European languages from Arabic is a consequence of this scientific contribution. By the beginning of the modern era, distillation technology began to spread rapidly throughout Europe, resulting in the emergence of beverages with higher alcohol content. Beverages such as brandy, vodka, whiskey, and rum became standardized during this period. While distillation technology supported the production of ethanol for medicinal and industrial purposes, it also led to the rapid spread of strong spirits, which created serious social problems in some societies. The gin craze, in 18th-century England, is one of the most striking examples of this. The spread of cheap and potent gin among Londoners led to increased crime rates, the disruption of family structures, and the deterioration of public order, necessitating the development of extensive social policies. The history of alcohol is also intertwined with the history of colonialism. The discovery of the New World led to the expansion of sugarcane production, which in turn led to a boom in rum production. Rum played a significant role in both the trade network and the slave trade triangle. The introduction of alcohol by Europeans to the indigenous peoples of the Americas accelerated cultural conflict and social disruption. Indigenous societies' biological encounters with alcohol differed from those of European societies, and this negatively impacted social structure. The study of alcohol's history is not limited to understanding the drinking habits that emerged in a specific geography. It also requires understanding humanity's relationship with agriculture, rituals, social structure, and even state formation processes. Alcohol is a constantly visible, sometimes decisive, element in both the development and transformation of human societies. Many researchers believe that alcohol's importance in the past was far greater than currently appreciated. The basis for this view is that archaeological findings point to earlier periods with each new discovery, thus demonstrating the profound place fermented beverages hold in human cultural evolution. While the alcohol production processes of ancient world societies may seem primitive by today's standards, they were based on extremely complex knowledge bases considering the conditions of the time. For example, the fact that beer brewers in Mesopotamia knew that fermentation would not occur without yeast is a significant indicator that the process was not a coincidence. These masters mixed raw materials in specific proportions, took care to maintain a constant temperature to ensure the yeast remained active, and ensured that the vessels used during production were clean. This demonstrates that even in an era when the concept of hygiene was unknown in its modern sense, a certain standard was sought in alcoholic beverage production. The role of alcohol in social life is often considered in conjunction with its economic and political impacts. In agricultural societies, in particular, alcohol production went beyond being a byproduct and, in some periods, became a commodity with direct economic value. Beer became a significant part of the economic cycle in regions where grain production was intense, and wine in regions where vineyards flourished. Some historians believe that alcohol even played a role in the development of agriculture. One theory suggests that humans may have begun domesticating plants not only to obtain food but also to produce alcoholic beverages regularly. Evidence supporting this view includes the earlier history of fermented beverage residues in regions where grain agriculture first emerged. Beer and wine production in ancient Egypt was not limited to daily life. These beverages were also an integral part of religious ceremonies, votive offerings, and death ceremonies. Drinking vessels found in pharaohs' tombs are associated with the belief that the deceased would continue to consume alcohol in the afterlife. This demonstrates that alcohol played a significant role not only in certain stages of life but throughout the entire life cycle. Ancient Egyptians were particularly specialized in beer. This beer is thought to have a much thicker consistency, higher nutritional value, and lower alcohol content than modern beers. Therefore, beer also served as a food source, especially for workers and the lower classes. Some documents indicate that workers in pyramid construction were paid in daily beers. Alcohol production followed a different developmental path in ancient Chinese civilization. Here, rice, rather than grapes or grains, was the primary source of alcohol. Numerous written documents indicate that alcohol was used not only for pleasure but also for medicinal purposes in Chinese society. In Chinese medicine, alcohol was believed to regulate the flow of qi in the body, increase blood circulation, and enhance the effectiveness of certain herbal mixtures. For this reason, alcohol was frequently used in medicine production. Furthermore, in China, the state regulated and taxed alcohol production from an early period. This tax policy constituted a significant portion of state revenues. The historical evolution of alcohol in Europe has been diversified by cross-cultural interactions. In ancient Greece, wine became an integral part of cultural life. Greek philosophers viewed wine not merely as a beverage but as a tool for intellectual discussion and social unity. For example, in gatherings called symposiums, elite groups engaged in philosophical discussions, read literary works, and engaged in cultural exchanges over wine. These gatherings are known to have been conducted within specific rules. Alcohol was consumed in moderation, and excessive intoxication was discouraged. Wine culture in Greek society was not limited to production and consumption, it also acquired a religious dimension through its association with the gods. Dionysus, the god of wine, symbolized both fertility and joy. The Romans, on the other hand, handled alcohol more systematically. The expansion of the Roman Empire across vast territories also enabled wine production to spread to diverse regions. The Romans developed technological innovations in wine production, improved storage methods, and established trade networks, making wine an economic commodity. They also maintained the morale and health of the Roman army. Wine played a significant role in the Umayyad War. Soldiers drinking wine mixed with water made the water safer and reduced the risk of infectious diseases. This practice demonstrates that alcohol's antiseptic properties were recognized in practice. By the Middle Ages, alcohol came under the control of religious authorities. Christian monasteries became important centers for the production of both beer and wine. Monks developed technical innovations, particularly in beer production, standardized production processes, and wrote down recipes, passing them on to future generations. Many famous beer brands that still exist today have their origins in monasteries. In medieval Europe, when daily water consumption was unsafe, people often quenched their thirst by drinking low-alcohol ale. This demonstrates that alcohol was used as an indirect means of public health protection. During the same period, distillation methods began to develop, leading to the emergence of beverages with higher alcohol content. One of the first widespread examples of distillation is seen in the Middle East. With the advancement of chemical studies in the Islamic world, distillation was perfected. The word alcohol itself derives from the Arabic word al-kul. Although alcohol consumption was religiously prohibited in Islamic societies, distillation techniques were advanced for scientific purposes and later brought to Europe. The widespread use of distilled beverages in Europe led to an increase in medical practices. Medieval physicians continued to use high-alcohol beverages as antiseptics. By the Renaissance, alcohol had become an important element of both social life and economic activities. With the expansion of trade networks during this period, different types of beverages spread throughout Europe, diversifying the drinking habits of societies. Furthermore, the process of colonization brought about intense interaction with societies outside Europe. Fermented beverage production methods of indigenous communities living in the Americas were discovered, compared to European alcohols, and some became part of European drinking culture. During the same period, distillation techniques brought from Europe to the Americas led to the development of beverages like whiskey on the new continent. As colonization progressed, European powers not only acquired new lands but also encountered the diverse drinking cultures found within them. For example, fermented beverages produced by communities in Central and South America, particularly corn-based, chicha, were both new and intriguing to Europeans. These beverages had a deep place in the rituals, religious ceremonies, and social life of the region's people. While some European colonists adopted these beverages, the development of European distillation ultimately led to the production of spirits in the colonies. As a result, indigenous drinking cultures gradually eclipsed the dominant European beverages. The emergence of whiskey, in particular, in the Americas is one of the most significant turning points in the history of alcohol. The distillation techniques brought by European immigrants, combined with the abundant grains found on the new continent, led to the rapid spread of whiskey production. The use of different grains, such as corn, rye, barley, and wheat, allowed whiskey to diversify from region to region. Whiskey distilled in America gradually became both an economic tool and a part of the community's identity. Indeed, some political and social events in American history are directly linked to alcohol. For example, the Whiskey Rebellion of the 1790s went down in history as a public resistance to the federal government's alcohol taxes. This rebellion clearly demonstrates that alcohol had become not only an economic but also a political issue. Similarly, in the Caribbean, rum production was widespread through the distillation of molasses produced during the processing of cane sugar, establishing a vast trade network between the colonies. Rum, in particular, became a component of the slave trade triangle, further demonstrating the central role alcohol played in global economic systems. During this period, alcohol became not only a drink but also a medium of exchange, a source of income, and a cornerstone of the colonial economy. The social impact of alcohol has always been a subject of debate. The proliferation of distilled spirits, particularly in Europe, in the 17th and 18th centuries led to a perception of a breakdown in social order in some regions. The period known as the gin craze in England is one of the most striking examples of this. The explosion of cheap gin production during this period led to widespread public intoxication, increased crime rates, and a perception of social collapse. So much so that alcohol addiction became a social crisis in areas known as gin lanes on London streets, forcing the state to intervene. These interventions included high taxes, production restrictions, and sales bans. All of this demonstrates that throughout history, alcohol has not only been a recreational drug but also a constantly controlled element of governance and social order. Towards the end of the century, alcohol production began to take on a more scientific basis. Scotch and Irish whiskies, beer varieties, wine varieties, and distillation techniques were shaped not only by traditional knowledge but also by the development of chemical science. A better understanding of fermentation processes, the discovery of yeast strains, and the technical precision of distillation led to improved alcoholic beverage quality. With scientific advancements, standardized production methods were developed, paving the way for large-scale production. Thus, by the Industrial Revolution, alcohol had transcended commercial production and become a global industry. After the Industrial Revolution, alcohol production and consumption entered a completely new phase. With the establishment of factories, beer and distilled spirits were produced on a much larger scale, distribution networks expanded, and alcohol became a global consumer product. During this same period, anti-alcohol movements emerged. Social movements known as the temperance movement, particularly in the US and Europe, advocated for the reduction or even complete prohibition of alcohol consumption. The primary justification for these movements was the impact of alcohol on poverty, domestic violence, crime rates, and social unrest. Over time, these movements became so influential that alcohol was banned entirely in the US in 1920. This prohibition, known as Prohibition, was one of the most radical decisions against alcohol consumption in history. The implementation of Prohibition had a wide range of consequences. When the official production and sale of alcohol was banned, illicit production and distribution on the black market increased rapidly. Illegal bars, underground entertainment venues, and organized crime syndicates began to grow in power. This period also paved the way for the emergence of notorious mafia leaders like Al Capone. Ultimately, it became clear that prohibition was exacerbating, rather than solving, social problems, and it was repealed in 1933. Prohibition is considered one of the most striking experiences in the history of alcohol, as it became clear that attempts to completely eliminate alcohol did not yield the expected results in society. This long history of alcohol demonstrates its complex nature, both individually and socially. Far beyond being a recreational beverage, alcohol has become at the intersection of many spheres, including economics, politics, religion, health, and culture. As in the past, alcohol is shaped today by social habits and cultural norms. In the modern age, alcohol consumption has become a part of social life while also remaining a focus of health policies and social research. The evolution of alcohol in the modern era can be considered a period in which the rapid transformation that began with the Industrial Revolution progressed in a much more complex manner. Technological advances, the expansion of global trade networks, the shaping of state policies, and shifts in cultural norms radically transformed both the production and consumption of alcohol. By the beginning of the 20th century, alcohol had become an embedded element in the social structure of nearly every society. However, this embeddedness is not a homogeneous acceptance, it appears as a phenomenon that assumes different roles in different geographies. In many countries, alcohol had become a part of national identity. For example, in France, wine was seen not only as a beverage but also as a reflection of agricultural production, cultural heritage, and gastronomic identity. Similarly, in Germany, beer production was a significant indicator of regional diversity and local cultures. In various regions of Central Europe, beer became a consumer product almost as widespread as bread. While the origins of beer-making traditions in these regions date back to medieval monasteries, in the modern era, it had merged with state control and industrial standards, creating a large-scale industry. By the mid-20th century, alcohol production had become a global activity. Wine production was no longer confined to Europe, significant viticulture industries had also emerged in regions such as South America, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. The climatic advantages of these regions encouraged the development of new grape varieties and led to a radical transformation in the global wine market. Thus, alcohol became a field where strong producers emerged not only from traditional production centers but also from various continents. During this period, the role of alcohol in international trade gradually increased. Trade agreements, import and export policies, tax rates, and customs regulations enabled the alcohol market to become a global industry. Countries began to view alcoholic beverage production both as a source of economic income and as a means of promoting their national brands. For example, Scotch whisky became not just a spirit but also an internationally recognized trademark of Scotland. Similarly, whiskey production in Japan developed rapidly in the second half of the 20th century, reaching a level of quality that earned global awards. This widespread alcohol production also brought with it significant social and health problems. Scientific research conducted throughout the 20th century more clearly demonstrated the effects of alcohol consumption on human health. Public health policies were developed in many countries to address the problems caused by excessive alcohol consumption. These policies generally focused on taxation, advertising restrictions, age limits, and sales regulations. Rather than banning alcohol completely, governments aimed to establish a controlled consumption model. High taxes and state monopolies, particularly in Scandinavian countries, are among the most well-known examples of efforts to reduce alcohol consumption. Anti-alcohol movements, particularly in the first half of the 20th century, began to adopt a more health-based approach in the second half. This period marked a significant shift in global attitudes toward alcohol. In many societies, complete alcohol prohibitions proved ineffective in practice. Consequently, governments turned to developing policies aimed at raising public awareness rather than banning alcohol consumption altogether. Educational programs, public service announcements, health services, and rehabilitation centers for alcohol addiction became widespread during this period. Alcohol addiction was no longer considered a crime but rather a health problem requiring treatment. During this period, the cultural aspects of alcohol consumption also underwent a transformation. With modern urbanization, mass culture, the development of media and the entertainment industry, the social use of alcohol has taken new forms. Bars, pubs, nightclubs, and restaurants have transformed alcohol consumption into a social activity. Consumption patterns have diversified across different age groups and social classes. At the same time, the representation of alcohol in popular culture has also expanded. In cinema, music, and literature, alcohol has frequently appeared as a metaphor, a character trait, an atmospheric element, or a lifestyle indicator. Especially in the last quarter of the 20th century, alcohol consumption habits began to change globally. Under the influence of globalization, different types of drinks have spread throughout the world. Drinks once confined to specific regions have now reached a global audience. Drinks such as Japanese sake, Mexican tequila, Brazilian cachaça, Caribbean rum, Scotch whiskey, and German beer have acquired both symbolic and commercial value worldwide. This diversity has made alcohol not only a product of local culture but also a product of small and medium-sized communities. This indicates that it has become a global consumption object. During the same period, a significant transformation took place in gastronomy. Wine pairing techniques, the craft beer movement, the emergence of boutique distilleries, and the development of mixology and cocktail culture transformed alcohol into a field of craftsmanship. This led to alcohol becoming not only a consumed substance but also a product specialized in, valued, and associated with art. These developments accelerated particularly in the early 21st century, transforming both the economic and cultural structure of the alcohol industry. In this century, the role of alcohol is much more complex. On the one hand, craft breweries, boutique wine producers, and small-scale distilleries proliferate, while on the other, global giant corporations control a large portion of the alcohol market. This dual structure allows both traditional and modern production techniques to coexist. Furthermore, digital media, social networks, and global communication technologies have created new influences on alcohol consumption and culture. Alcohol brands reach large audiences with digital marketing strategies, and consumer trends are driven by data analysis. The future of alcohol remains a matter of debate. While health policies aim to reduce consumption, culinary and cultural movements continue to position alcohol as a lifestyle element. Furthermore, the rise of non-alcoholic beverage alternatives in recent years has initiated a new era in alcohol's historical development. Non-alcoholic beers, wines, and cocktails have become increasingly common, reshaping consumption habits. This shift suggests that alcohol's cultural role is evolving and could evolve to a completely different level in the future. Alcohol's presence in the modern world is a culmination of the transformations it has undergone throughout history. Alcohol, a cultural ritual in ancient societies, a food source in the Middle Ages, a commodity in modern times, and a labor habit during the industrial era, now stands at the heart of modern life, both as a global industry and a means of individual pleasure. However, this modernity has not eliminated the historical burdens inherent in alcohol. On the contrary, traces of alcohol's past are clearly visible even today in every country and every culture. By the mid-century, advances in medicine and psychology scientifically demonstrated that alcohol was not merely a social beverage but also an addictive substance. This discovery transformed the course of discussions about alcohol, it was no longer a matter of individual preferences or religious and moral debates. Public health, government policies, treatment methods, and human behavioral models had to be re-evaluated around alcohol. Thus, a new era for addiction science was ushered in. The understanding of alcohol's addictive nature transformed health policies in many countries around the world. Guidelines were prepared, new treatment models were introduced in psychiatric clinics, and public awareness of the effects of alcohol began to be raised. However, alcohol's cultural roots were so deep that these scientific advances failed to completely change consumption habits. In many societies, drinking continued to be seen as a means of social connection, a way to relax, or a traditional behavior. The second half of the century also marked the globalization of the alcohol industry. Developments in transportation technologies, the proliferation of media, the rise of advertising, and the rise of global brands transformed alcohol from a mere local beverage. Now, dozens of drinks from different countries were available in every country's supermarket, each culture learned from another's drinking rituals, and consumption trends took on a global character. This complicated the social impact of alcohol, as increased accessibility also increased consumption rates in some countries. During this period, the economic burden of alcohol consumption on societies became increasingly visible. Alcoholic patients receiving treatment in hospitals, companies experiencing job losses, alcohol-related accidents, rising crime rates, and pressures on public safety led to increased government involvement in alcohol policies. Many countries implemented age limits, sales hours, alcohol taxes, advertising bans, and restrictions on public drinking. Each country has sought a different balance based on its own cultural landscape. Some have liberalized drinking, others have implemented strict controls, and others have developed hybrid systems aimed at both preserving traditional drinking cultures and reducing social harms. Alcohol's place in modern industry is not limited to production and trade, it has also become a significant part of gastronomy. Wine tasting, whiskey festivals, the craft beer movement, cocktail bars, and the revival of local spirits have transformed alcohol into a subject of art and craftsmanship. Thus, alcohol consumption has shifted from being solely focused on intoxication or pleasure to being focused on aesthetics, taste, and experience. Meanwhile, anti-alcohol movements have become stronger than ever before. Thanks to modern medicine and social sciences, the physical and psychological effects of alcohol have become much more clearly understood. This knowledge has led to increased individual awareness and public health campaigns. In many countries, younger generations are choosing to drink less than previous generations. In some places, soft drink markets are growing, and the sober curious movement is gaining ground. This shift opens the door to new discussions about the future social role of alcohol. In today's world, alcohol continues to exist as a substance simultaneously imbued with multiple identities. A cultural heritage, an economic sector, a means of social cohesion, a personal escape, a risk of addiction, a culinary experience, a debate on government policy, and a public health issue. Each of these complex identities demonstrates the multi-layered place of alcohol in human history. The effects of a simple fermentation experiment thousands of years ago, extending to the present day, demonstrate the breadth of humanity's capacity to produce, consume, and imbue with meaning. Alcohol's place in medical history is one of the oldest testimonies to humanity's efforts to understand and treat disease. Even thousands of years before the development of modern science, alcohol was used both as a medicinal ingredient and a ritual-based healer. Therefore, its traces in medical history constitute one of the most profound processes through which alcohol has become ingrained in human cultures. The history of alcohol's use in medicine dates back to the Mesopotamian period, the period of the earliest civilizations. Sumerian tablets clearly show that beer and wine were not only daily beverages but also included in concoctions used to combat various illnesses. Healers of that period used alcohol to extract the essence of plants, extend the shelf life of medicines, and provide comfort to the sick. Alcohol's antimicrobial properties were not yet known, but its effects were perceived through observation. Beverages used to cleanse diseased areas were precursors to the modern concept of antiseptics thousands of years ago. In Egypt, alcohol was particularly relevant at the intersection of medicine and ritual. Papyrus records record the use of wine and herbal mixtures to cleanse wounds, relieve pain, and even during the embalming of the dead. Egyptian physicians believed that wine had a purifying property and regularly administered it for both religious and medicinal purposes. This use demonstrates that wine was not only a physical substance but also a symbolic tool in the history of medicine. The role of alcohol became more systematic in ancient Greek medicine. Hippocrates was one of the first great physicians to define alcohol as both a remedy and a danger. He believed that wine, when consumed in the right amount, aided digestion, cleansed wounds, reduced fever, and strengthened the body. However, when consumed excessively, it harmed the body, clouded the mind, and aggravated illnesses. Hippocrates' dual approach was an early example of the concept of dose sensitivity, which remains valid even in modern medicine. From this period on, alcohol began to be perceived as a substance with both benefits and risks in medicine. The Roman period, however, marked the period when the medical use of alcohol became more practical. The Roman physician Galen used alcohol for wound healing, as a painkiller, and as a digestive aid. Alcohol was one of the essential supplies carried on military expeditions to both reduce the spread of disease and ease the pain of surgical procedures. Galen's students and followers began systematically recording alcohol's antiseptic properties, thus spreading the knowledge of alcohol as a cleansing agent in medicine throughout Europe. During the Middle Ages, medicine and religion were closely intertwined, and alcohol was used for both religious and medicinal purposes. Monastic physicians used alcohol to extract herbal remedies, thus developing more effective tonics. With the spread of distillation from the Arab world to Europe, alcohol began to be produced at much higher temperatures. Distilled beverages, called water of life, were considered fever-reducing, pain-relieving, and body-purifying. Many tinctures we use today, dissolving plant essences in alcohol, derive from the medical tradition of this period. During the Renaissance and the early modern era, alcohol revolutionized medicine. As scientific observations increased, it became clearer that alcohol was not only a relaxing beverage but also had powerful disinfectant potential. Instruments used during surgery were cleaned with alcohol, and attempts were made to prevent wounds from becoming infected with it. Of course, the concept of microbes hadn't yet been discovered, but practical experience had proven its infection-reducing effect. The 19th century was a critical period of alcohol's evolution in medicine. This century saw the development of modern medicine, and the hazards of alcohol began to be scientifically examined. The advent of anesthesia significantly diminished the medical importance of alcohol. For many years, alcohol had been used to obscure consciousness during surgical procedures, a practice that was both risky and inadequate. With the discovery of substances like ether and chloroform, alcohol lost its role in this field. However, its use as an antiseptic continued. That same century, public health research began to systematically examine the harmful effects of alcohol. Alcohol addiction was no longer a moral weakness but began to be defined as a medical condition. During this period, the term alcoholism emerged, and addiction became a disease category. The medical community conducted research to understand how alcohol affects brain chemistry, behavior, and psychology. This research further intensified in the 20th century, providing a scientific basis for addiction treatments. By the turn of the century, the medical role of alcohol had changed significantly with the discovery of antibiotics. While alcohol continues to be used as an antiseptic, the development of modern medicine has made it a central role in medicine. It has lost much of its reputation. Yet, even today, alcohol continues to be used in medicinal tinctures, skin antiseptics, and laboratory applications. This demonstrates that the medicinal role alcohol has held for thousands of years has not completely ended, it has merely transformed and modernized. The story of alcohol in medical history reflects both humanity's search for treatment and its changing understanding of substance use. Once the sole antiseptic, the sole painkiller, and the sole relaxant, alcohol is now a medical tool used within a scientifically controlled framework, with clearly recognized risks and benefits. This long process encompasses periods when alcohol was both glorified and restricted, along with the development of medicine. Thus, alcohol has earned a unique place in medical history as both a solution and a problem. A look at the cultural history of alcohol reveals that it has been central to a series of rituals that have evolved alongside humanity. Every society has used alcohol not merely as a beverage, but as a symbol of identity, belonging, celebration, mourning, rites of passage, and social order. Therefore, the social meaning of alcohol at any given time in history can be understood not only by its consumption but also by the structures and values within a society. In early societies, alcohol was central to the rituals people created to gather together. Some hunter-gatherer societies used fermented beverages to celebrate the success of collective hunts, strengthen tribal bonds, and foster harmony among community members. Alcohol's relaxing effects on the body and mind helped people feel closer during these communal events, facilitated communication, and fostered solidarity within the tribe. This function continued unchanged in later eras. In ancient Mesopotamian cultures, beer was a common denominator of both daily life and religious rituals. Beer was believed to be a gift from the gods, prepared by priests in temples, and distributed on special occasions. In this context, alcohol was seen as an object representing the gods' blessing. Drinking was not merely a pleasure but a complement to a sacred act. The way alcohol was consumed in these rituals also reflected the hierarchical order of society. Those of higher status drank higher quality liquor, while the common people were content with simpler fermented beverages. In ancient Greece, wine was not merely a beverage but a tool for philosophical and social discussion. Meetings called symposiums were intellectual conversations accompanied by wine. At these gatherings, drinking was conducted within a certain discipline, and excesses were discouraged. The purpose of alcohol in Greek society was not intoxication, but rather to enhance mental clarity and enrich discussion. This approach demonstrates that the social meaning of alcohol was not merely a physical experience but integrated into a cultural function. During the Roman period, alcohol became particularly central to social celebrations. Banquets, festivals, and state ceremonies were often crowned with wine. Although alcohol consumption became more liberal and sometimes excessive during this period, it still served as a symbol of social order. For the Romans, a drinking culture was integral to civic identity. Wine drinking was seen as a symbol of civilization, while beer was seen as a symbol of barbarism. This attitude demonstrates the powerful role alcohol played in shaping cultural identity. During the Middle Ages, European societies continued to use alcohol extensively in both religious and social rituals. Wine was a central symbol in Christian liturgy, representing the blood of Christ. Wine was considered one of the most sacred elements of religious ceremonies. During the same period, beer became a staple beverage throughout much of Europe. Because water sources were often unclean, fermented beverages were considered safer. Thus, beer became a common daily necessity among children, workers, monasteries, and peasants. However, this ubiquity enhanced, rather than diminished, the social importance of beer, as brewing beer became a common social practice in every home. Similarly, in other cultures around the world, alcohol was a fundamental part of ritual and social identity. In Japan, sake became an essential element of traditional ceremonies, New Year celebrations, and marriage ceremonies. Offering sake was seen as a sign of politeness, and accepting it as an expression of mutual respect. In China, a wine culture spanning thousands of years was an integral component of social status and intellectual identity. Similarly, in Central Asian societies, kumis was both a symbol of nomadic life and a sign of hospitality. Offering a drink to a guest was considered both an honor and a duty in those cultures. In indigenous societies in the Americas, fermented beverages were a part of social solidarity. The Mayans and Aztecs used fermented products, along with cocoa, in religious rituals. These beverages were believed to facilitate communication with the gods. In these societies, alcohol was part of a spiritual experience, and its consumption was subject to specific rules. In modern times, alcohol rituals began to transform. With the Industrial Revolution, a bar culture emerged among the working class. Bars became places where people gathered after work, socialized, exchanged news, and built solidarity. These spaces were not only places for drinking but also social spaces where worker culture was shaped. During this period, alcohol became a tool for bonding within the rapidly changing structure of societies. After the mid-20th century, under the influence of globalization, drinking rituals took on an international character. As beverages from different cultures spread around the world, new consumption habits emerged. The art of ale culture, barista-like mixology, and the craft drink movement grew during this period. These developments did not eliminate the ritual aspect of alcohol consumption. On the contrary, they diversified rituals and created spaces for personal experimentation. Today, alcohol rituals encompass both ancient cultural patterns and modern consumption habits. Rituals such as raising a glass at wedding ceremonies, celebrating New Year's Eve with alcohol, sharing a drink with a meal at the table, and sharing a beer at gatherings with friends remain important habits that strengthen social bonds within societies. However, at the same time, under the influence of media, social platforms, and commercial brands, alcohol has also taken on more individual forms of expression. Now, alcohol is no longer merely a communal experience, it is perceived as a personal choice, a lifestyle indicator, or even a hobby. This entire process demonstrates that the cultural meaning of alcohol has not changed over time, but has expanded and acquired different layers. Alcohol continues to occupy a unique place throughout history as a substance that unites and divides, sacred and mundane, dangerous and pleasurable. In medieval Europe, alcohol was far more than just a staple, present in nearly every aspect of daily life. During this period, alcohol became not just a beverage but also a central element in hygiene, nutrition, medicine preparation, religious rituals, social solidarity, and economic activities. This was primarily due to the fact that clean drinking water was difficult to access and often hazardous to health in many regions during the Middle Ages. Most drinking water sources were susceptible to contamination by human and animal waste, therefore, boiling, filtering, or purifying water to make it sterile was not common. This led to the use of low-alcohol beverages as a safe water alternative in everyday life. During this period, beer and wine were consumed by all classes of society. While the nobility generally enjoyed high-quality wines, peasants often consumed simple, low-alcohol, nutritious beers. These beverages were consumed not only for alcohol consumption but also for energy and nutritional support. Beer was considered a source of nutrition, especially in Northern Europe, where grains were abundant. The carbohydrates and protein contained in the beverages produced in the brewery were an important source of energy for daily life. Therefore, beer was considered not only a recreational substance but also a staple food in the medieval diet. The use of alcohol in medicine was also quite prominent during this period. Influenced by the works of Galen and Hippocrates, medieval physicians used alcohol for both therapeutic and diagnostic purposes. Physicians believed that wine and herbal extracts mixed with alcohol could reduce the intensity of illnesses. In particular, it was believed to lower body temperature, alleviate fevers, and soothe the digestive system. Because wine was considered to have a warm and dry temperament, it was considered a suitable remedy for balancing illnesses with a cold temperament. Monastic medicine further enhanced the importance of alcohol in medicine during the Middle Ages. In many monasteries, alcohol became a key ingredient used in both medicine and cleansing. Monks were highly skilled in herbal medicine and utilized wine's solvent properties in the preparation of medicines. Wine was considered the ideal medium for dissolving the active ingredients of plant extracts and achieving a better mixture. This period also saw the development of alcohol-based medicinal tinctures. Medicines prepared by adding herbal extracts to wine or beer were widely used to treat colds, digestive problems, fevers, skin diseases, and injuries. The alcohol produced in monasteries was used not only for medicine but also for sterilization. Although the concept of microbes was unknown at the time, monks observed that wounds became less inflamed when cleaned with wine. This experience constitutes an early example of antiseptic practices. The use of wine for wound cleansing, especially during surgical procedures, is considered a significant step in the history of medicine, born of practical knowledge. Alcohol also played a significant role in the daily lives of the clergy. Because wine was central to religious ceremonies in Christianity, most monasteries focused on viticulture and wine production. This led to monasteries becoming one of the most important sources of wine revenue in Europe. Alcohol, used for religious, medicinal, and economic purposes, became an indispensable resource in medieval society. In the medieval Islamic world, however, the status of alcohol evolved along a different path, both culturally and medically. While religious prohibitions limited its use in daily life, they did not completely eliminate it for medical purposes. Physicians living in Islamic lands accepted the external use of alcohol as an antiseptic and utilized its solvent properties in drug preparation. The benefits of alcohol are discussed in the works of Ibn Sina, and the use of alcohol as a tool, especially in herbal medicine, is clearly evident. These approaches reveal the medical advancement of the medieval Islamic world. On the other hand, the influence of alcohol on social life in the Middle Ages was not limited to medicine and religion. Wine and beer were central to both social integration and social relations. Alcohol consumption became the norm at village celebrations, harvest festivals, Sunday entertainments, and various communal events. These events were important not only for entertainment but also for strengthening social solidarity and unity. Drinking gatherings, especially during the winter months, were an integral part of social rituals that fostered warmth and closeness among the people. Another important aspect of alcohol in the Middle Ages was its impact on the economic system. Winemaking and brewing became a vital sector that fueled the growth of both rural and urban economies. Many villages relied on local beer production for their livelihoods, while in cities, large breweries were the center of trade. Similarly, viticulture was one of the lord's most important sources of income within the feudal system. Among the church, monasteries, and aristocracy, alcohol production was a key factor determining economic power. Combining all these elements, it becomes clear that alcohol in the Middle Ages went beyond being a mere beverage and became a versatile social tool. Throughout this period, alcohol was considered a medical tool, a religious symbol, a foodstuff, and an economic force. From the perspective of medieval medicine, alcohol was considered one of the most reliable means of treatment and protection within the limited hygienic knowledge of the period. In the Middle Ages, alcoholism was particularly common among men, but women also drank. However, women's alcohol consumption was socially more criticized, and drunkenness, especially by married women, was considered a great disgrace. Therefore, female alcoholism is less documented. This does not mean that women drank less. While religious authorities frequently prohibited women from excessive drinking, men's drinking was tolerated in some societies and even encouraged for increased physical strength in certain tasks. For example, in some peasant communities, it was customary to reward workers with beer during harvest time. In this context, alcoholism was viewed as a weakness of character or a sin rather than a disease. Religious attitudes toward alcohol were contradictory. In Christianity, wine was both an important part of worship and considered a blessing, as long as it is consumed in moderation. The Bible mentions both positive and negative aspects of wine, therefore, rather than prohibiting it entirely, the Church advised moderation. However, it was harsh on those who drank excessively. Drunkenness became a frequent topic in medieval sermons. Priests explained that those who consumed alcohol excessively both polluted their souls and harmed society, declaring it a satanic habit. These sermons were often held in public, particularly in town squares, and drunkenness was stigmatized as a degrading act in the eyes of society. Despite this, alcohol consumption never declined, as the public's living conditions made alcohol essential. Medieval legal systems had various penalties for drunkenness. In England, those who became excessively drunk and started a brawl could be imprisoned or fined. In some cities in Germany, punishments called drunken barrels were used to eradicate drunkenness. The offender was placed in a large barrel and paraded around town, both to shame and to teach the public a lesson. This punishment signified that alcoholic behavior was considered a moral problem. In Scandinavian countries, men who became drunk and harmed their families could be ostracized by society, their economy intervened, or punished by the church. These practices demonstrate that awareness of alcoholism existed, but it was considered a social deviation rather than an illness. Monasteries and monks were at the center of an interesting dilemma regarding alcohol. Both beer and wine production were common in monasteries. In fact, some famous European beer traditions derive their origins from medieval monastic culture. However, monks also warned the public about the harmful effects of drunkenness. Because monastic life required discipline, excessive drinking was forbidden. Despite this, many monks consumed large quantities of beer, especially during the long winter months or while performing strenuous labor. While beer of the period was less alcoholic than modern beer, its effects were potent when consumed in large quantities. Therefore, church records frequently mention monk drunkenness, arguments over drinking, and disciplinary punishments. In the Middle Ages, alcoholism was most prominent in urban life. In cities, taverns were one of the centers of social life. Taverns were not only places for drinking, but also places for commercial transactions, social gossip, peasant recreation, and sometimes criminal plots. As the city's population grew, the number of taverns also increased, leading to a further increase in alcohol consumption. Drinking in taverns was generally inexpensive and often provided an escape for tired workers. It was common for workers, leaving behind long working hours, to resort to excessive drinking. This behavior can be considered an early example of the modern concept of stress alcoholism. Medieval records frequently record the midnight drunken brawls, tavern crimes, and drunken deaths on bridges of this environment, reflecting the heavy drinking culture of this environment. The medical perception of alcohol also significantly influenced the view of alcoholism. Medical knowledge of the time was based on the views of Galen and Hippocrates, who believed that the body was composed of 4 humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Alcohol consumption was seen as a factor affecting the balance of these humors. Medical texts noted that excessive wine consumption clouded the mind, increased black bile, leading to melancholy, or heated blood, leading to fits of rage. Some physicians describe drunkenness as temporary insanity. Therefore, alcoholic behavior was often explained as a temporary excess, an imbalance of bodily fluids, or the effects of sin on the body, rather than a mental disorder. Methods used to treat alcoholics during this period were quite primitive and often ineffective. Some physicians recommended cooling syrups, bitter herbal mixtures, bloodletting, or suppository applications for those who drank excessively. In some villages, there were folk beliefs that drunkenness was treated with shock, sometimes involving pouring cold water on a person or placing strong-smelling herbs on their heads to sober them up. However, it was clear that none of these methods cured alcoholism. The fundamental problem was the individual's alcohol addiction, which was intertwined with society, work routines, and psychological needs. In the Middle Ages, alcoholism was not merely an individual issue, it was also seen as a threat to social order. Crimes committed due to drunkenness, domestic violence, and decreased work productivity were all disruptive to society. Consequently, some city governments began to regulate alcohol sales. In some areas, taverns set closing times, regulated the price of alcohol, or made a distinction between weak beer and strong beer, with the stronger beer sold only during certain hours. However, for economic reasons, most rulers avoided completely restricting alcohol sales because of the high revenue generated by taxes. Consequently, alcoholism in the Middle Ages was both a visible and invisible social problem. Because it was so integral to daily life, it insidiously permeated everyone's lives, became the subject of religious and moral debate, was medically misinterpreted, and was often controlled through criminal sanctions. Even without a modern definition of addiction, it's clear that societies recognized this behavior, were troubled by it, and even developed various methods to limit it. Alcoholic individuals in the Middle Ages, just as they do today, struggled with both physical and social consequences, but due to the lack of knowledge at the time, they were unable to find real treatment or support. This period constitutes one of the most intense and controversial chapters in the social history of alcohol consumption. For more informative videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.